Hey y'all, so today I'm going to give you a framework to how to create a better plan for your nonprofit. Let's get into it. Hey y'all, this is Tiffany with Boss on a Budget. I help new and small nonprofits get up and running. So if you need help for your nonprofit, make sure you are subscribed to this channel. I have over 100 videos on nonprofit startup and raising money, so you definitely need to tap in and make sure you subscribe. For today's video, I just wanted to share a simple plan, like a simple step-by-step for how to create a good plan for your nonprofit. So if you've heard me speak, then you've heard me say the word plan or planning over and over again. In fact, I have a nonprofit startup workbook. It helps you plan your first year. And in that workbook, I reference 4 specific type of plans that you need to have in place and give you guidance for how to create those plans. But I realize as I talk about planning a lot that some people may not really understand what I mean by plan, or what they assume they're doing in planning is not enough. It doesn't go far enough. So I figured I would do a video just to help you create a good framework for creating your plan. And when you do this, you'll be way more successful and you'll be way more strategic about how you launch your nonprofit. So what you're gonna get from this video is a 5-step process on how to create a plan. And specifically, I'm going to reference your organization's strategic plan, but you can use this framework for any kind of plan that you want to create for your nonprofit, or if you want to create one for your business or for your life in general too. It's meant to be general to help you be smarter about how you decide to approach your nonprofit. And if you wait to the end of the video, I'll just share one more tip to help make sure you make this process as successful for you. So make sure you watch to the end. So the first thing you need to do when you're planning is to do an assessment. So this is before you decide to make any moves, before you decide this is the direction I want to go. You really need to understand what's the lay of the land, or what's the landscape. So what I mean by that is what's happening internally and what's happening externally, or what are the factors that may impact how you plan, right? So if you're not paying attention to what's going on around you and you decide to move in a certain direction without thinking 3 steps ahead what may be coming your way, then even the plan you develop or the goals that you put in place may be faulty because you haven't done enough research to make sure you anticipate what may be coming your way. So the first thing you really need to do is do an assessment of where you are, because you can't know where you want to go unless you understand where you are and honestly how you've gotten to the place where you've been. We're going to keep this really simple because I don't want to overwhelm you, and you really just need to ask yourself some basic questions. What do we have that's working well? What are our strengths? And what are the things that we need to improve on? Or what are the things that we need to make sure we develop more, right? Those are 2 basic questions. What's going well? What are our strengths? What's not going well? And where do we need to develop and grow in? You need to do that internally. So when I say internally, I mean internally to your organization, right? Like, what are the strengths or the skill sets, for example, for the people who work for the organization or who volunteer or who serve on the board, right? And then you can do that externally as well. You want to think about what's happening around you and what may be impacting around you, what's going well that may impact you, and what's not going well that you need to be paying attention to further on down the road. And when you're doing this plan, when you're doing a strategic plan for your organization, part of this assessment has to include looking at people who are similar to you, or organizations that are in similar industries or in the same path as you. You have to understand and learn from people who are going through what you're doing right now or who have been through that process, because you want to gather those lessons learned. I know you've heard of the saying, don't reinvent the wheel, right? That's a real thing. I know you want to feel like you're different, you're unique, and that's important to have unique qualities about your organization. But there are some basic fundamental things that you can learn from other organizations, or you can learn to avoid by watching their journey and studying their journey. So I talk a lot about finding nonprofit mentors. I've done a few videos on that. I'm going to link one in particular where I talked about in that video, where you need to identify executive directors who are in spaces that you want to be in, or who are a part of nonprofits who have scaled the way you want to scale. You need to identify people like that. You need to identify people in your same industry who can help give you insight. You need to identify people who are walking alongside you doing the same kinds of things so you can learn. And all of this means that you just need to be good at listening. And listening just means understanding the world around you, being curious about the things around you, and then taking that and applying that to your situation. When you get really good at listening, it helps you become better, smarter, more strategic. And you don't want to just listen to people you assume are the experts, right? Because a lot of times we think the experts are only the professionals, only the accountants, or only the people who have a lot of money or a lot of resources. But it's not just that. You need to listen to people who you want to serve because they are experts in their own right as well. And you need to listen to your board, and you need to listen to your volunteers, and you need to listen to your potential donors and your donors. Everyone has a part to play in this, and you need to make sure you're in the right position to learn and glean whatever you need to glean from those people. Okay, step 2 in creating your plan is to select goals. The goals are the first step in identifying where you want to go. So you've done your assessment. Now you need to decide, based on everything that we know about what we should be doing, what we may want to be careful of, or how we want to be more strategic about approaching. Then you got to decide for yourself, what is the best move for us right now? And you want to think about it in terms of, where do we want to be a year from now? Where do we want to be 3 years from now? Whatever time period your plan covers, ask yourself that question. Where do we want to be? Right? What position do we want to be in 1 year from now? I recommend in my nonprofit startup workbook to start with a 1 year plan. It's also good though to think long term as well. You want to have a general sense long term of where you want to go, right? Like 3 years or 5 years. We know in 5 years, eventually we want to be this. That helps you figure out like, okay, this is the lane we want to be in. This is how we want to grow. This is how we want to progress. But honestly, as a startup organization, it's not wise to plan meticulously for 5 years because so many things can change in 5 years. So for 5 years, have like high level general goals about the direction you know you want to go, but be specific about your 1 year plan. And then as you begin to grow and get stronger, you can start creating longer plans for more strategic moves that you want to make, like purchasing a building or securing a large amount of funding. So you want to start with your goals, and you want to make sure your goals are SMART. Now, I actually broke down SMART goals in another video that I did live, and I saved all of my live videos for my YouTube membership. So if you're interested in joining my YouTube membership to hear that breakdown, make sure you join. I'm placing the link below in the description box. But I'm just going to summarize what SMART goals are. It's just a framework that you can use to make sure your goals are actually effective. So you want to make sure that they're specific. You want to make sure they're measurable, right? You want to make sure they're actually realistic and attainable. And you always want to have a time associated with your goal. Because if you're not specific about where you want to be, then you don't really have an idea of how you're going to get there. Because you don't know what it looks like when you do get there. Because you haven't thought through that process. So the reason why you want to create a SMART goal is because it gives you a sense of direction. We know that in a year from now, we want to be in this place. And then when you start thinking about, okay, what is it going to take, which is actually the next step, then you can start thinking about, okay, this is the kind of thing we need to do in order to hit our goal in the way that we want to hit it. So I hope this is making sense. But you should have at least 3 to 5 goals overall, organizationally, for your nonprofit. And if you're creating any kind of other plan, have at least 3 to 5 goals overall for what you want to accomplish, and make sure you use that SMART goal framework or some other framework that makes sure you're specific about what you're doing, and you can go back and measure whether or not you hit those goals. This is a really good place to utilize your board. I know a lot of you are small and you feel like you can't rely on your board, or your board isn't as effective as you want it to be, or maybe some of y'all don't care about your board and are only using them because you need their names for the paperwork. I advise against that, but you should be using your board to help you strategize. You should be using your board to help y'all identify where you want to be, like I said, a year from now. And you want to know why that's really important to engage your board? When you have a discussion like this, then you can listen and really hear where they are. You can get an assessment of where your board members, what they really think about the nonprofit, what they have in terms of expectations of the nonprofit, and it can help you understand where they may have some limiting beliefs, or they may not be aligned with where you want to go. but it could also help you realize that maybe they are aligned and you're right in the same lane. So engaging your board in this process and discussing with them where you believe you all should go in terms of your goals is a really helpful exercise to help you all get on the same page. Because it's not a bad thing if you all have different concepts of where you want the organization to go. It's not a bad thing for you all to disagree. What matters is how you get to consensus. What matters is how you navigate that to get to common ground. And I know for a lot of you guys as founders, you don't want to engage other people because you don't want other people to trash on your ideas, or you don't want other people to sway you from what you've already decided in your mind you want to do. But just keep in mind, this isn't about you. It isn't all about your feelings. It's about what's best for the organization and what's best for the people you're serving in terms of you being able to complete your mission. And having more people at the table help you have a broader, more deeper perspective about how to do that. So I encourage you to engage your board and have discussions about what you want your overall goals to be. And if you get the Nonprofit Starter Workbook, you'll notice that I talk specifically about 3 areas that you should be paying attention to when you're creating goals, specifically around your programming, your infrastructure, and fundraising and communication. So just keep that in mind. So the third step is identifying the tactics or the strategies that you want to use to reach those goals. Now, when people talk about goal planning, there are all kinds of words that are always thrown around, right? And a lot of times they have the same meanings or they have different subtle meanings. I just like to keep things simple. So oftentimes you'll hear me use certain words, or I'll say, or you could use this to describe this, right? Just so we're all on the same page and you get just the general concept of what I mean. So you may hear words like tactics or strategies or objectives. Generally in this video, I'm talking about them all being the same thing. And essentially, it's just the answer to the question, what is it going to take for us to reach our goals? What do we need to do? What steps do we need to put in place? Or what actions do we need to take in order to reach our goals? All right, sometimes people call these action steps. But you want to reverse engineer the process. So think about yourselves a year from now. Just actually do this mental exercise and ask yourself, we're sitting here, I'm recording this video in 2023. So let's say I'm recording this video in 2024. What is it really going to take for us to get to where we want to be when we're sitting there in 2024, right? Who do we need to engage? What kind of things do we need to know about? What do we need to learn? What do we need to implement in order to make this happen, right? And really, really break that down. I think this is where there's a breakdown in planning for a lot of people because they don't necessarily want to worry about the details. I find this a lot with visionary people. I've worked with a lot of awesome visionary people who are launching their nonprofits, and they're very good about seeing long term. They don't have problems seeing their goals. They know exactly where they want to be, where they want to end up. But it gets tricky when the question becomes, well, how are we going to get there? And not only just how are we going to get there, what are the steps we got to take to make sure we're getting there? That's where people get a little iffy. They're like, I don't want to worry about that. I just want to hit the goals. So you want to be very careful about this process and really be thoughtful about, okay, if we know, for example, that we want to launch our programming in a year, then what is it going to take for you to do that? You're going to have to hire people, right? You're going to have to think about how you're going to pay them. You're going to have to select the curriculum. Maybe you're doing like a tutoring program. So you're going to have to select your curriculum and think about how often you're going to do it. You're going to have to come up with the parameters of your program. You should probably come up with some programmatic things like your logic model and your specific outcomes for your program. You want to think about collecting data and how you're going to do that and measure that. You got to think through the entire program. Just go step by step and say, okay, in order to implement this or get where we need to go, what is everything we need to do to make sure we can hit our goal and to make sure we're prepared to do that? All right. I could talk all day about this because I just love planning. That's my problem. I like planning and don't often execute. So sometimes it's like a trade-off. Some people are good at executing and some people are good at just planning. But that's the point again. That's why you have a team. That's why you are strategic about who you have on your team. You need some visionary people and you need some detailed people. And then you need a mix. Maybe the people who are in between, but you want to think about who you need alongside you to make this happen and think about the personalities and the skill sets that you need to make this happen to help you develop your plan. So for step number 4, you want to identify how much it takes to do these strategies or these action steps and how much effort it's going to take, right? So you want to think about how long it takes and how much effort. And this is important because you got to do things based on your capacity. And this helps keep your goals realistic. This helps you stay on the right path, right? And it also holds you accountable. And it holds everyone else accountable as a group to make sure that you're actually hitting your mark and that you're actually doing what you said you would do. So the purpose of a plan, honestly, is to keep you on task. So you don't get swayed by all these other things that may come at you. Because if you're not really working a plan sincerely, then anytime there's a new idea or anytime something new comes up, you're going to go this way, that way, right? With having a plan in place, you should then, if a new idea comes up, you should compare it against your plan and says, does this match where we said we want to go? And if it doesn't, we don't need it, right? So it's really important for you to think about, when do we want to get these things done, and how much effort is going to take, and who is going to do it? And let me just say this, because this is a pet peeve of mine. Founders can't do everything, and founders should not be doing everything. So as a nonprofit founder, if you find that you're executing every single strategy as your nonprofit, I'm just going to tell you right now, that's not sustainable. You're heading toward burnout. And I'm going to tell you now, that's an indicator that your board does not understand their role. In particular, if you are a new organization and you're in the startup phase, your board has to understand it's not their role to sit back and just comment on what's happening. They have to get their hands dirty too. And their hands being dirty, but what I mean by that is doing some of the work, executing along with you. That's what a working board does. So typically when you're a startup organization, you have what's called a working board. They have to participate. They have to do just as much as they strategize, just as much as they comment on things. They also have to do. So if your name is on every single piece of the plan, then that's an indicator for you that your board doesn't understand their role and your board needs to step up. And even if it's not your board doing everything, you can tap into volunteers. You can use your committees and people that you have on your committees to do some of this. But again, this is why you don't do plans in a vacuum. Because then you can put it on the table and say, y'all, this is where we're moving. And who can we have or who can we tap into to make sure these strategies get done when we need them to get done? This is a planning process where everyone has to be involved. And I also just want to make the point that this is an iterative process. So that just means you're going to have to keep going back. You may have to tweak and look at it. It's a living, breathing process. But the whole point is you just want to make sure that you're being smart and strategic and you're engaging people. But also it means you're holding people accountable for who does what, when they're supposed to do it, and you're thinking strategically about the effort it's going to take to get it done. And then the final step of the plan is making sure you have a mechanism to review and evaluate that plan. So what do I mean by that? So it's one thing to say what you're going to do, but the next step to turn it up is to look back at that plan and say, are we hitting the mark like we say we want to? Is there something that is keeping us from hitting the mark? Are we coming across certain barriers? Do we need to adjust, right? Do we need to switch or pivot? It's really important for you to go back to what your original plan is and do an assessment and say, this is where we thought we would be in a quarter. Are we on the right track? Are we headed in the right direction? Are we on track to hit our goals? And then that'll help you realize if the goals were actually realistic or if there's a breakdown somewhere in the process where you need to go back, retool some things, shift, and start all over again, right? The whole point of this, like I said before, is it's iterative. So you're going to have to keep going back. You're going to have to keep trying. Don't get discouraged because you don't necessarily hit your mark. But the important thing is to have a process to assess whether you are hitting your mark so you're in tune with the direction that you're going. You should always feel confident. You should always feel secure that you know where you're going. You're not always going to feel secure around like, is this really going to work? Is this really going to happen? You know, because sometimes things fall through, but there are always lessons in what falls through. The point for you watching today is to make sure that you do what you can to make sure you have at least some framework, some guidelines for where you want to go, and monitoring that so you can adjust as you go along. So the last step just means you want to make sure there's a mechanism for you to go back to the plan and assess whether or not you're hitting your goals. And you need to set a time period for that. Are you looking at it monthly? Are you looking at it quarterly? And who's responsible for looking at it? What forum are you going to use to look at your plan and assess your plan? Are you going to do this during your meetings as a board? Are you going to do like an annual retreat process where you look at your goals and you go into detail with everything and you do like a working session together and then you come back and follow up 6 months from there? Whatever it looks like for your organization, just have some kind of mechanism to assess where you are and to pivot if you need to. I promise to give just one tip around like how to make this an effective process. And I'll just say this, just be open to the process. I think sometimes people get really discouraged when things don't pan out the way they do. And unfortunately, it makes you question whether or not you should still do what you're doing, or makes you question about whether or not you have the right strategy, or is this like even what you're supposed to be doing? Like, is this the right direction? Those are all legitimate questions to have when failure comes, but it doesn't necessarily mean you should completely stop. So my advice to you is just to be open and let the process take you where it needs to go. It's not going to feel good. It's not going to feel comfortable when you're trying to figure out how to adjust or trying to figure out how to launch your nonprofit and this strategy ain't working. So you're going to go do this strategy. It ain't working. Well, part of this strategy is working. That's the process. Find the good in the process, find what works, learn from what didn't, and keep moving. Just be open to the process. Be willing to go along with it. You said you wanted to change somebody's life. You said you wanted to change something in your community. That didn't mean it was going to be easy. So you got to equip yourself to be ready to accept that and to go along with it, right? But the key word, I'm just going to say this and then I'll stop talking, is that you need, like I said, be open, but you need to be equipped. Things are just not going to come to you. You got to learn for yourself. You got to do your research. You got to have the right team around you. You still have to do the work. I'm never going to suggest that starting a nonprofit is easy or that starting a nonprofit is for everybody, but it's for the people who are open to it and for the people who equip themselves to be able to do this work effectively. Y'all, I am so encouraged by you doing good things in your community. I wish the best for all that you plan to do. You really will change your community. You really will change your world. And I'm just here to support you through that process. So if you need help with your nonprofit, make sure you visit me at www.bossonabudget.com. And I will see you in the next video.